You're in the middle of working an arrest. The patient's in VFib. You've shocked them 3 times, given epi, and you push 300 milligrams of amiodarone. You keep up with CPR, but when you check the rhythm again, it's still VFib. Minutes are ticking by, brain cells are dying, and firemen are getting worn out from the CPR. Patient's still stuck in a shock-refractory arrest. Everything in you, your gut, your training is screaming, do more, give more medicine. Some medics think it's good to dump the med kit. More is better. So you grab another 150 milligrams of amiodarone. It feels right. It feels logical. The ACLS algorithm even says to. It says a second dose right there. But what if I told you that this automatic reflex is like throwing an anchor to a drowning person instead of a life ring? What if the evidence showed that pushing that extra dose doesn't just fail to help, but might actually harm your patient's chance of ever walking out of the hospital? We're not talking about a small side effect here. We're talking about a decision that could be the difference between your patient going home to their family versus just getting a pulse back for a few minutes. Today, we're looking at a fascinating and practice-changing study that questions one of the most basic assumptions in resuscitation. We're going to explore why, for amiodarone in a tough cardiac arrest, less is proving to be much more. For years, amiodarone has been a key player in the ACLS algorithm and pre-hospital protocols for shock-refractory ventricular fibrillation or pulseless ventricular tachycardia. Most EMS protocols are pretty clear. After the third shock doesn't work, you give a 300 milligram bolus. If the patient is still in a shockable rhythm after more shocks, these guidelines suggest a second dose of 150 milligrams. For a lot of us, this has become second nature. The thinking behind it makes sense. It's like trying to put out a stubborn fire. If the first bucket of water didn't work, you'd naturally grab a second one, right? The idea is that you just need more of the good stuff to overwhelm the problem. When you're in the heat of an arrest, running out of options and time, the urge to do more is powerful. It's an action. It feels like you're stepping up the care and giving the patient every shot they've got. We're trained to fix problems, and when a drug isn't working, our first thought is often to just give more. Honestly, it's what drives dual sequential defibrillation too. More. This leads to what we can call the 450 milligram approach. The initial 300 followed by another 150. A lot of protocols allow it, and a lot of us do it. We've been working under the idea that 300 milligrams is good, then 450 must be better for those really stubborn cases, right? But is it really? Or is this just something we just do because we can? This very question is forcing me to take a hard look at my practice. This brings us to a big new retrospective study by Galbenegger and his team, published in the journal Resuscitation in 2025. This wasn't some small one-off observation. They dug into the massive Resuscitation Outcomes Consortium Cardiac Epidemiologic Registry, looking at data from 2011 to 2015. They focused on a specific group, 910 patients who had an out-of-hospital cardiac arrest, were in a shockable rhythm, and stayed that way after 5 or more defibrillation attempts. These are the boss-level cardiac arrests, the toughest cases where we'd be tempted to give more drugs. The researchers split these patients into 2 groups based on how much amiodarone they got. The first group received the standard 300 milligram dose. The second got a total of 450 milligrams. They then looked at the 3 key outcomes. First, return of spontaneous circulation. That's called ROSC, by the time the patient hit the emergency department. Second, the big one, survival to hospital discharge. And third, maybe the most important of all, a good neurologic outcome at discharge, meaning the patient's brain was still them. They can still feed themselves. They can still recognize their family. That's important. The results were not what most people would have guessed. They fly in the face of the more is better mindset. Let's get into what the study actually found, because this is the heart of the matter. First up, ROSC, getting a pulse back in the field. The group that only got 300 milligrams of amiodarone had a higher rate of getting a pulse back by the time they got to the hospital. Their rate was 30.8%. The group that got the higher 450 milligram dose had a ROSC rate of only 24.2%. The study's stats confirmed that this wasn't just a random fluke. The adjusted probability difference was 6.6%, a significant finding in favor of the lower dose. Now, what about the outcomes that matter most? Survival and brain function. When the researchers looked at survival to hospital discharge, they found the 300 milligram group had a 21.3% survival rate. The 450 milligram group was at 18%. For good neurologic outcomes, the numbers were 16.5% for the 300 milligram group versus 12.7 for the 450 group. Now, it's important to know that the differences in survival and neurologic outcome weren't statistically significant. So we can't say with 100% certainty that 300 milligrams saves lives long-term from one study. We can say something just as critical. There was zero evidence that giving the higher 450 milligram dose helped at all. For every single outcome they measured, the trend pointed in favor of the lower dose. The higher dose was all risk with no reward. So what we're left with is a pretty clear picture. The higher dose is worse for getting a pulse back. It shows no real benefit for survival or neurologic recovery. This leads to the obvious question: why? So why would less medicine actually lead to better results? The answer lies in the double-edged nature of amiodarone. Think of amiodarone as a powerful but clumsy giant. Its main job is to calm the electrical storm in the heart. But while it's doing that, its big clumsy feet are stomping all over the patient's blood pressure, QT interval as well. Amiodarone's a dirty med. It does a lot of things that I don't necessarily want. Pushing IV amiodarone can make a blood pressure drop in up to 20% of patients. For a patient in cardiac arrest whose body's only getting a trickle of blood flow from the chest compressions, any drug-induced drop in blood pressure can be a disaster. That drop means even less blood getting to the heart and the brain. It's completely plausible that the first 300 milligram dose is the sweet spot. Think of it like salting your food. The first sprinkle brings out all the flavor. That's your 300 milligram dose getting the antiarrhythmic effect. Pushing another 150 milligrams like pouring on way too much salt. It doesn't make the food taste better, it just makes it inedible. That extra dose adds to the drug's toxic side effects, hurting the tiny bit of perfusion you've created with good CPR. You might be fighting the arrhythmia with one hand while tanking vital organ perfusion with the other. This is backed up by international guidelines from groups like the American Heart Association. They all recommend 300 as the first dose, with the second 150 milligram dose only being an option. The evidence from this new study strongly suggests that sticking with the first dose and focusing on other parts of the resuscitation, like amazing CPR and quick defibrillation, is the safer and smarter play. Or how about this? Try a different path to the goal. Consider lidocaine. Put IV lidocaine back into protocols, formularies, and practice. But that's for a future rant. If you want to hear my pro-lidocaine rant, speak up in the comments below. It's right down there. But as for amiodarone, what does all this mean for you? What does it mean for your patients? What does it mean for you whether you're at the bedside or in the back of an ambulance? What does this mean for your next shift? The takeaways are pretty straightforward. First, it's a wake-up call to check your autopilot settings. If your go-to move is to grab that second dose of amiodarone, it's time to question that instinct. The best evidence we now have suggests that holding back may be the better move. Second, this really drives home the importance of simplifying our priorities in an emergency. Drawing up and giving meds during a code is a high-risk task. Sticking to a single evidence-backed 300 milligram dose cuts down on the mental gymnastics and lowers the chance of dosing errors when you're juggling a million things at once. Third, and most importantly, this is all about patient safety. By sticking to the 300 milligram dose, you're choosing the path that seems to give your patient a better chance of getting a pulse back, while also protecting them from the harm of the drug's side effects. You're making a choice not based on a gut feeling that more is better, but on the evidence that puts both effectiveness and safety first. This isn't about being less aggressive. God knows that's not me. It's about being smarter. It's about putting our energy into the things we know make a difference. Less time off the chest, high quality CPR, and shocking as soon as possible. Now I want to hear from you. What are the amiodarone protocols where you work? Does this new evidence change how you'll think about your next shock-refractory arrest? Drop your thoughts, questions, and experiences in the comments below. This is where the real learning happens, not just in journals, but right here in the trenches with each other. That's how we get better at what we do. If you found this helpful and want more deep dives into the science that shapes our practice, make sure you subscribe and ring that notification bell so you don't miss what's next. The way we manage cardiac arrest is always changing. Trust me, I've given beryllium in my career. For years, we've worked in a world where giving more drugs using a bigger hammer felt like the best way to save our patients. But the evidence on amiodarone is telling a different story. The mistake many of us have been making is thinking that a bigger dose means a better outcome. The Galbenegger study is a powerful reminder that every single thing we do has a risk-benefit analysis. In shock-refractory cardiac arrest, sticking with 300 milligrams of amiodarone seems to be the sweet spot. It gives the antiarrhythmic effect we need while cutting down on the dangerous side effects that can wreck our resuscitation efforts. It gives our patients a better shot at getting a pulse back with no evidence that it hurts their long-term survival compared to a higher dose. The next time you're in that tough spot, 5 shocks in with VFib staring back at you from the monitor, remember this evidence. More isn't always better. Sometimes the smartest and most effective move is knowing when to stop. I'm Angry Bill. This is pre-hospital wisdom. Until next time, stay safe.